can't believe this is happening. This is so embarrassing. Asuna hid her red face behind her hands and shook her head violently, as though to shake away the awkwardness that had been brought to us by me. To be honest, the thought did cross my mind. I mean, for sure in 2 years there must have been some pent-up frustration of that sort amongst the players in SAO. How would they relieve that? Fighting monsters can only do so much, I guess. But how is it even possible to perform such a thing that's meant to be done in the privacy between you and a partner? Where it's controlled by a system, a GM. Does it even count? This is virtual reality. I guess that's how virtual affairs started. But then again, for Asuna and me, for everyone in SAO, this isn't just a virtual reality game. This is reality. Let's just forget this whole thing ever happened, okay, Kirito? Asuna's nervous voice trembled into a sheepish laugh as she brought up the menu with her left hand and scrolled through the player equipment tab. We can just sleep, just like you wanted. Wait, before I had any time to think, I grabbed her left hand on my right to keep her from changing back into her regular clothes. Stopped by me, she looked at me confused. I won't lie to you, Asuna. The thought of doing it never crossed my mind. Immediately, her eyes shot at me like lasers and her right fist tightened. But that's because I didn't think it was possible to do that. I spat out quickly before she could fully react. She might not have a rapier equipped or any armor on, let alone clothes, but I'm certain she could have done a lot of damage still. But now that I know, I quickly looked away as I brought up my own menu and scrolled down the options list to ethic code off. Nervously, I activated it. I've never done this sort of thing before, in the game or. I maintained eye contact with the floor instead of her, no matter how much I wanted to look at her in her perfect body. I've always felt uncomfortable around people, but now, in this situation, someone as beautiful as Asuna, I was just too embarrassed to say it out loud. Kirito. Asuna's angelic voice nearly shattered me. If I were truly a man, I could sweep Asuna off her feet. I can make love to her forever and ever. But honestly, where do I even start? Reading mangas or privately watching it on my own is not the same when actually doing it. Now that I've watched enough to know what goes on, sure, I've browsed out of curiosity, but I've totally immersed myself into online gaming for as long as I've known that raising my stats was more my priority than talking to girls. I really am an idiot. I've never done it too. I mean in the game. It was now her turn again to look away awkwardly, but unlike me, she was able to admit it. Or IRL. It was as if she was reading my mind because she continued on. I mean, I heard stuff, but I don't know how to really start. After she paused for a moment, she slowly made her way closer to me and placed her hand softly on my cheek. But I do not special moment with you, Kirito. She leaned in closer, her cheeks a slight, only with you. The first time I kissed Asuna was after I thought I would never see her again. Did I do it because I thought that I would die knowing that I'd never kissed a girl? No. It's because seeing Asuna, especially at that moment, was like a breath of fresh air. She'd been on my mind for so long, I was able to finally put those thoughts into action. I can't even recall when I started feeling this way about her, about anyone for that matter. I don't remember when I started looking forward to seeing her. Every time she stood by me, I suddenly felt warmer. I felt as though she really was with me in the real world, lying next to me as we journeyed together in SAO, as though this really wasn't a death game. Now with this being my second time kissing her, I felt like I'd become something of a habit. Something I'd always want to do whenever I'd see her and whenever we'd have to part. Gently, but somewhat quickly, I ran my hands through her long, silky hair to the back of her head and pulled her to me. Tilting her head up to guide her lips to mine, I leaned into the wall she had backed me up to when she was about to pulverize me earlier. She stumbled into me, her nearly bare body pressing against me, still fully clothed. What started out as she shyly became more open, forward, and now full of warmth. I was uncertain at first of how to react. But when she subtly licked her lips in between kisses, she responded by sliding her tongue along mine, followed by an almost inaudible moan. Without thinking, my fingers loosened themselves from her hair, and my hands slowly trailed along her bare shoulders, down her arms into her waist. I could feel the fabric of her underwear underneath my palms, and I pulled her lower half to meet my own, while pressing me against her as well. I still don't know how this whole process can work in a virtual reality game. I hope it wasn't the same as fighting, where the system will detect the first motion and will complete the rest of the action for the player. I didn't want to be controlled by the system. I wanted this moment to be as real as it could possibly get. Actions performed only by me. This isn't fair, Asuna giggled. Giggle vibrated against me as she pulled away, staring at me with those sparkling eyes. I barely have anything on. You're still wearing your clothes. Sorry, I grinned and scratched the back of my head timidly. Sometimes I forget about myself whenever I'm with you, Asuna. As I pulled her back to me, I kissed her forehead, nose, and both cheeks. I can't help myself when I'm around you. When I said that kissing her had become a habit, I lied. She became my addiction. All I wanted to do was kiss her, for I don't know how long clearing the game had been erased on my list of priorities. The very last thought on my mind. All I wanted at that moment, and possibly for the rest of my life, was Asuna. I wanted to have my lips everywhere on her soft, smooth, perfect skin. I wanted to have her be the only person I see when I wake up, when I go to sleep. Without warning or any hesitation, I lowered myself to hook my hands on the back of her neck, on the back of her thighs, and lifted her off the ground, holding her tightly to me. Kirito! Asuna yelped in surprise and grabbed out on my shoulders for balance. What are you doing? What do you think? I laughed smugly as I carried her through the kitchen and down the hall to her bedroom. Her room was small, but that didn't matter. The smaller the room, the closer we were together. It was also dark. However, with the faint light from the large window, I could see the bed placed in the middle of the room, barely big enough for only the two of us, but again, that didn't matter. I comfortably laid Asuna on the back of her bed, like I had been carrying something fragile, and once more, like the addict I had now become, I kissed her forehead, nose, and lips. Wait here, I said as I took a step back and opened the menu, searching for the player's equipment that, as though my life depended on it. I'm not going anywhere, Kirito, Asuna giggled, sensing my impatience. After what felt like forever, I tapped on the remove all button, and in a flash, everything I was wearing had disappeared. I imagined that in real life that the taking off the clothes part would have been something partners would help each other with. This will have to do. I still wasn't sure what the system would allow. I stood before her completely naked, and all she had done for about 10 seconds was gawk at me. I had a sudden realization of how she felt moments ago, and I suddenly wanted to cover myself. It may have been dark, but I looked down and observed myself. I remembered that for the calibration we had to pat our bodies so we could decipher our height and build, but I didn't remember touching myself there. I didn't think I felt the need, yet somehow it looked accurate. Even with it now being hard, I almost didn't know whether to feel pleased or embarrassed. Kirito, are you blushing? Asuna teased, and I could see her crawling up to me, lifting herself onto her knees until she was almost up my bare and hairless chest. You are, aren't you? She hummed softly as she brought her right hand up and placed it on the middle of my chest. Slowly, she began tracing my collarbone, around my pectorals, then down to my abdomen. It tickled just a little bit of my skin, but mixed with the tension building in my groin, it felt intoxicating. I was beginning to have a difficult time breathing. Seriously, Bleach, can that happen now? Please. Please.
Nope, a little bit longer.
No.
God damn it.
Oh my.
I'm halfway.
Are you actually only halfway?
I am only halfway.
Oh shit. Continue on.
Wait, it gets worse. I haven't gotten into the actual bad part yet.
Yeah, you haven't even.
Okay.
Can someone send me some bleach? What is this?
No.
All right, everyone go mute.
Oh my god. Right,
Everyone go mute.
Give me a second. Give me a second to save myself. Oh god. All right. God damn it. Suddenly she took a hold of my hard length and slowly moved up and down, then stopped circling along the bottom of my head. Aghast as an unbelievable sensation coursed through my entire body. Then my legs nearly buckled. What are you doing? I groaned, but not from pain. What do you think? Asuna laughed smugly, repeating what had happened just moments ago, but to me instead. I needed to calm down. She continued, I was certain to explode. Now being in charge again, I knelt onto the bed with her in between my legs as I guided her down to her back with my body over hers. I kept on my hands and knees and stared down at her, my eyes resting on the little pieces of fabric she had left. I wanted to repeat what she had said to me earlier in her dining room, but I felt we had teased each other for too long. Wordlessly, I lowered my head to the crook of her neck and began leaving a trail of kisses, while one hand made its way to her shoulder, and the other held me above her. With one finger, I hooked under the strap of her bra and began to pull it down. With Asuna's help, she arched her body upwards to reach to the back of her cottony undergarment and unlatched it for me. As soon as I pulled it off her, I tossed it aside, certain that once it hit the floor, it would disappear. The quick flash of light determined that. When I brought my hand back, I started to trace along her bare chest, as she had done to me before. As I brought my lips back to hers, I started to trace small circles, getting smaller and smaller until the tip of my finger touched her erect nipple. For a quick moment, my mind was brought back to when I was waiting for her on the 74th floor, the day after we decided to party together, and I had accidentally groped her 3 times. Who knew that the day would come whenever I'd be intentionally doing it? But instead of just meaninglessly groping it like an idiot, I lightly placed my hand over her breast and cupped it in my palm. My fingers pressed firmly like a massage. That made Asuna moan a little louder into my mouth, which made me that much harder. Once I left her lips, I immediately wanted to go back to them, but I decided against it. I wanted my lips all over her body, and that was exactly what I was going to do. Skipping her neck, I kissed down her collarbone, then in between the mouths of her breast, with my hand still cupping her breast. I lowered my hand to the other, now leaning on my forearm and gently kissing her on the mouth, earning another moan from her. Just like what I had done with my finger, I repeated with my tongue. As soon as I got to the center, I placed my whole mouth over her and licked the nipple playfully. Kirito! Asuna called out and gasped, and her hands immediately wrapped around my hair. I could feel her legs wrap on my back in attempts of pulling me closer. Her breasts were becoming sparser as I continued to tease her with my tongue. After a couple more seconds, I decided to switch to the other room feet. From what I've heard from others, there's more than one spot to pleasure a woman. I've never listened enough to know exactly what those spots were, but I was certain I had some idea. After leaving her breasts, I made my way down to her stomach. I moved so far down the bed that I was nearly off it, but I was the last bit of clothing and I didn't care where I was. At the foot of the bed, I reached over to the elastic band of the cloth that barely covered a little bit of her. It left little to the imagination of what was underneath, but I still wanted it gone. Before I pulled them down to her legs, I looked at her for reassurance. "Are you sure, Asuna?" I asked. If she wanted to stop, I would. I would never make her do something she didn't want to do. As long as I got to do it with her, I didn't care how long I'd have to wait. But she didn't want to wait. Without a word and almost breathlessly, she nodded at me and tilted her lower half to help me pull that little piece of clothing. I slowly pulled the last of her undergarments down her leg. The movement felt so graceful and smooth. It was a work of art, and I was the painter creating a masterpiece. But we all knew that I could never create something as beautiful as Asuna. Now completely naked, I paused for a moment to stare at it. Everything about it was perfect, given that the nerve gear had managed to create us out of data with pinpoint-like accuracy. I could feel confident that I'm seeing, touching, and tasting is the real thing. However, that just made me want to be in the real world with Asuna even more. "I miss your lips, cutie toe," Asuna said silently, and she reached for me, the look of her face almost pleading. "Come back, please." I almost said it 1,000 times before, if not, then thought it. But I want to follow Asuna to the ends of the earth, in this world, the real world, and the next. I almost felt a little pathetic for feeling that way, but never have I had such immense thoughts about someone before. It felt like an obsession. What my life was like before her, I could never imagine having again. What would I do without her is something that I didn't ever want to think about. As I crawled towards Asuna, she gave me a slight grin and quickly tugged her legs in, sweeping them underneath the blanket. Just seeing her separate herself from me made me anxious, even when it was just by some thin material. I couldn't bear to be away from her, not for 1 second, so I sat underneath the blanket as well, laid on my side and wrapped her in my arms, squishing her perfectly round breasts onto my chest as my lips collided with hers. There was no more shyness being expressed through our contact anymore. It was now forceful and seemingly rushed, as though we had lost all patience. We barely parted for air. If we had gone any longer, I probably would have passed out. While Asuna ran her fingers through my hair once more, my hand gingerly traveled down her side, dipping with the curves of her body. I stopped when the palm of my hand passed her belly button, but my fingers wanted to inch closer to where her tightly closed legs met. I pulled my head back mid-kiss and searched her eyes for permission. Without breaking contact, Asuna nodded quickly and inhaled deeply as though to brace herself. If she was nervous, so was I, but that balanced out with my need to have her. Hesitantly, my fingers inched closer until my middle finger slipped in between the folds of her pussy. It was warm and wet. When I looked down at Asuna, she had her legs closed and her lips were slightly open, breathing in and out, slowly but deeply. As I met her lips with my own, I began to slide my middle finger up and down, matching the pattern of her breathing. When I passed that sensitive little bead, Asuna let out a surprised moan into my mouth and buckled her hips in my direction. Refusing to part, I covered her mouth with mine and repeated the same motion with my finger. But this time I used my ring and index to spread out the now slick folds, widening the home that I was so eager to enter. As Asuna's breath began to pick up, I quickened my pace. Her body reacted every time I touched her, my hands turned into fists in her hair. Gripping them tightly and pulling me even closer, her legs started to quiver and her moans got louder, turning into cries. If just seeing her like this got me hard, and touching and hearing her turned me into a stone. "Kirito," she began repeating my name over and over again with her pitch getting higher and higher. She was no longer able to control her own body or voice as I continued to stroke her mercilessly. It kept going and going until finally she let out an ecstatic cry and her body trembled violently against mine. I held her close to keep her still. Her body was moist with sweat and the pace of her breathing eventually calmed. She looked beat, tired, worn out, but I wasn't done yet. This sudden need to be with her came out of nowhere. Either that or I had just noticed now, but I wanted Asuna. I needed her. The tension built up inside me had gotten so high I was ready to burst. I needed to be inside of her. Without taking a break, I pulled myself over her, her head in between my arms and my legs in between hers, pushing them apart until she was wide open for me. I couldn't wait any longer. It was almost excruciating, and that pent-up frustration some of the SAO players had finally made sense. However, they had this feeling for about 2 years. I just had it now. "I'm a little nervous," Asuna said quietly with a light chuckle, and then she placed her hands on my shoulders. "Will it hurt?" If I had experience, I'd be able to tell her. We were both in the dark. "I don't know," I managed to answer confidently. However, this never ending having to have her. "But we can stop here." "I don't want to stop," she replied quickly as she pulled my head towards hers, making our foreheads touch. "I want us to keep going." And with that, she gently took a hold of my hand, my hard length, which to me felt like it was throbbing. I positioned both of us. I could feel the tip just at the entrance, and I slowly inched forward, wanting in. "Go slow, okay?" she whispered. I nodded against her forehead and exhaled deeply. "Let me know when you want me to stop." She opened herself more for me, and I began to push inside her, feeling resistance. I continued until she gripped my shoulders and groaned with her eyes shut tight. "Asuna?" I halted and gently pushed the hair away from her face so I could see. "Am I hurting you? Should I stop?" "No, Kirito. Keep going," she pleaded and took in deep breaths. "Please keep going." She cried something incoherently, but started to arch her lower back upwards, taking me in. The feeling of sliding inside her nearly made me blank out. She was so tight, warm, and wet. It was foreign to me, but I loved every minute of it. almost too much that I nearly burst, and I had to stop to catch my breath. Asuna pulled my face and searched my eyes. It was not her turn to be concerned, but I shook my head and rested it on her chest, squeezing my eyes shut. Looking at her was going to make me explode, but with my eyes closed, all of my senses were heightened, and it was nearly impossible to control myself. When she took me all in, I slowly started to move in and out, then slowly picking up the pace. I could feel the tension inside me building, higher and higher, needing release. I pushed myself in harder and faster and harder. Kirito, I moaned loudly, her body writhing beneath me as her hands ran through my hair, gripping them all at the base and her core tightening all around me. Me too, I grunted between thrusts as my hands gripped on the pillows so tightly my knuckles turned white. She took a hold of my shoulders as she groaned with pleasure. I could feel her nails digging into my skin. I thought I'd feel pain, but it was euphoric. She was keeping my body on high just as much as I was keeping hers. I could sense us both reaching our peak. With one last cry, her walls clenched around me and her leg wrapped around my back, pulling me deeper. I buried my face in her moist neck and damp hair to muffle my groan as I could feel my pulse hard into her. Biting my lower lip so hard I nearly bled as her leg slowly unhooked itself from my back. Our breathing returned to normal and I pulled out from her, almost immediately missing the warmth. I continued to lay over top of her, resting on my forearms. I felt so exhausted I just wanted to collapse into her. But she looked worn out as well. With a sigh, I fell onto my side, still needing to catch my breath and take in what had just happened. I stood up at the ceiling, feeling relieved and happy. It may have not lasted as long as I could have wanted, but it was incredible. Kirito? Asuna called softly when I looked at her. Her eyes were closed, but there was a content smile on her face. Her naked chest slowly rose up and down. Can we stay like this tonight? I gently slid my arm underneath her neck to pull up closer, and I rested my cheek over her head. She leaned into me. Yeah, I answered with a smile as I felt myself drift off into sleep. I'd like that. Fuck you, you sick bastard. It's all over.